Welcome to the Explainer. So have you ever actually stopped to wonder why your absolute favorite snack always tastes exactly the same? Like batch after batch, year after year, it never changes. Well, spoiler alert, it's definitely not just luck. Right behind every single consistent crunch, every perfectly balanced flavor, and every enticing aroma, there is this hidden, highly rigorous scientific world. And today, we're going to unpack the fascinating science of how our favorite foods are actually evaluated and perfected way before they ever reach our mouths. Which brings up a pretty big question. Who really holds the ultimate power in the grocery store aisles? You might think it's the massive food corporations or the marketing executives in some boardroom. But in reality, the ultimate judge is you, the consumer. But here's the catch. Consumers are fickle. Food companies really can't afford to leave a multi-million-dollar product launch up to chance. So they rely on professional sensory scientists. These are the experts who essentially decode human perception to figure out exactly what makes a product soar or totally flop on the market. Okay, let's dive straight into our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll explore the science of the senses. Then, we'll step inside the sensory lab. Third, we're going to look at the rules of tasting. Fourth, we'll be deconstructing flavor and texture. And finally, we will wrap up with finding flaws and gathering data. Let's get to it.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the science of the senses, your body as a measuring tool.
So we live in an age of incredible technology, right? We've got AI that can detect practically anything. But get this, even the absolute most advanced laboratory machines cannot fully replace the human sensory system when it comes to quality control. Literally, your body is the ultimate measuring tool. By definition, sensory evaluation is a very strict scientific discipline. It's used to evoke, measure, analyze, and interpret human responses to food. And notice, this isn't just about what hits your tongue. It's a fully orchestrated experience perceived by sight, smell, touch, taste, and, believe it or not, hearing. Think about it. The satisfying audible crunch of fresh bread or a potato chip is absolutely vital to your enjoyment of that product. All of these stimuli are working together to create the big picture of a product's quality.
Let's just zoom in on the tongue for a second. As humans, we recognize 5 basic tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami. But the eating experience goes way, way beyond just those 5. We also have to process complex chemical sensations, things like spiciness, cooling, burning, and astringency. I want you to imagine taking a sip of your morning coffee right now. Think about the crazy complex receptors on your tongue lighting up. They're processing the bitter notes of the roast, the sweetness if you added sugar, and the literal physical burning heat of the liquid itself. That is a massive amount of data being sent straight to your brain in a fraction of a second.
And this brilliantly illustrates how intertwined our senses really are, especially when it comes to smell. Actually, we process aroma through 2 completely distinct routes. The orthonasal route is what we typically think of as smelling, sniffing the food right before we take a bite. But the retronasal route is a whole different ballgame. This happens when we perceive aromas from inside the mouth while we're chewing and swallowing. Basically, volatile compounds travel up the back of our throat and right into our nasal cavity. This is exactly why having a bad cold or losing your sense of smell completely ruins what we commonly call taste. Smell accounts for a massive, massive portion of flavor.
Moving right along to Section 2, inside the sensory lab, eliminating the variables.
Okay, eating a snack on your couch. That's casual, relaxed, and let's be honest, probably a little messy. But professional sensory evaluation happens in a vastly different, almost clinical reality. To get good data, scientists absolutely have to eliminate the variables. Consider the incredibly specific standard temperature range of 20 to 22 degrees Celsius. That is the gold standard for sensory evaluation. These rooms require intense environmental control. The air has to be perfectly ventilated, completely free of any random foreign odors, and they strictly regulate the temperature and humidity, not just to keep the food samples chemically stable, but to keep the panelists perfectly comfortable. You really don't want them distracted because they're feeling a little too hot or a little too chilly.
Because to truly understand a food product, you have to completely strip away the psychology of eating. And the controls in these labs, they are incredibly strict. They use neutral lighting so the color of the food doesn't play tricks on the brain or distort expectations. Panelists sit in these individual isolated tasting booths to completely stop peer influence. I mean, you literally can't look over at your neighbor to see if they made a grossed out face. Plus, all samples are served in identical portions, at exact temperatures, in completely identical containers, and they're marked only with randomized numerical codes. This strips away every ounce of brand expectation and bias. You are evaluating the pure product and nothing else.
Which brings us to Section 3, the rules of tasting, preparing the human instrument.
So because the panelist body is the primary measuring tool in this science, that tool requires strict, constant calibration, just like a highly sensitive scale or a thermometer. The restrictions placed on these professional tasters are intense. For hours before a testing session, panelists cannot consume any strongly seasoned foods. They can't drink alcohol, and they definitely can't have excessive coffee. Smoking? Strictly prohibited. They can't even wear perfumes, scented lotions, or strongly scented cosmetics. Why? Because all of that external noise interferes with delicate aroma perception. And once they're actually in the booth, they have to use neutral palate cleansers between every single sample. We're talking still water, plain bread, or unsalted crackers. This completely neutralizes sensory fatigue, ensuring that the 10th bite they take is evaluated just as accurately as the very first one.
All right, Section 4, deconstructing flavor and texture, the anatomy of a bite.
Let's take a single conceptual bite of food and just slow time way down. We're going to deconstruct the exact chronological evaluation process a professional goes through. It happens in 3 very distinct steps. Step 1 is the aroma. This requires a brief initial sniff, and it has to be brief because our olfactory receptors adapt to smells incredibly quickly. Like if you hover over a scent too long, you literally stop smelling the nuances. It just vanishes. Then, step 2 is taste. A small portion of the food is consciously and evenly distributed across the entire mouth. This ensures all the different taste receptors can get in on the action, analyzing the balance and the finish. And finally, step 3 is texture. Depending on what the food is, the panelist assesses the physical structure. Is it hard, brittle, juicy, sticky, elastic? They meticulously map out the whole physical experience.
So the crucial point here is how we actually measure these experiences. As a consumer, if someone asks you how you like a certain food, you'd naturally use a hedonic scale. That's usually a 9-point scale ranging from dislike extremely all the way up to like extremely. You're basically just measuring your own personal preference. But professional sensory scientists, they use intensity scales. Professional tasters are not in that booth to tell you if they like the food. Not at all. They are there to precisely measure specific sensory attributes. They might be rating the exact level of crunchiness on a scale of 1 to 10, or pinpointing the precise intensity of a smoky note. It is pure data collection.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, finding flaws and gathering data, protecting the consumer.
This meticulous, step-by-step analysis isn't just about making things taste delicious, it actively acts as a shield against flawed or even dangerous products ever making it to the supermarket shelves. Consider the undeniable connection between off-putting sensory notes and their root causes. Early detection of sensory flaws is absolutely vital for food producers. For instance, if a panelist picks up on musty, moldy, rancid, or sulfurous aroma notes, that is a massive red flag. It usually points straight to fat oxidation or microbial growth. Or if they detect a paper-like, soapy, or metallic taste, it often reveals chemical contamination or some kind of severe technological error on the production line. Catching just a subtle soapy note in the lab can literally prevent a massive, incredibly costly disaster for a producer and, more importantly, protect consumer health.
Now, what's really interesting about this is a very clever, specific methodology they use called the triangle test. It's essentially an ingenious difference test. Here's how it works. A panelist receives 3 samples. 2 of them are completely identical, and 1 is slightly different. The panelist simply has to identify the odd one out. Companies use this constantly. Let's say they want to change a recipe, maybe switch to a slightly cheaper ingredient, or swap in a natural dye instead of an artificial one. They need to know if human beings can actually notice the difference when evaluating it completely blind. It's a real game changer for product development.
But here's the reality. All of this rigorous tasting is entirely useless without equally rigorous data collection. Standardized procedures and statistical analysis are what actually turn these subjective human experiences into reliable, actionable data for food companies. Everything requires meticulous documentation, down to the specific date, the batch number, and even the panel composition. They use strict international standards to ensure a test done today is totally comparable to a test done, say, 5 years ago. They apply heavy statistical analysis to determine if a flavor difference is a true significant change or just natural ingredient variability. And they rely on specialized software to track exactly how a product's quality holds up over time. The whole shebang is highly tracked and calculated.
The sensory world is just incredibly complex. It sits right at this fascinating intersection of biology, psychology, food technology, and really stringent statistical analysis. These professional tasters are highly trained human instruments, keeping our food supply consistent, safe, and, of course, delicious. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. Next time you sit down to take a bite of your absolute favorite snack, will you just taste it or will you analyze it? Thanks for joining us on this explainer. Keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.